Big Bear Nation, and welcome back to the homestead. Well, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to take care of ducks. Now, we did a video before on whether or not you should have them on your property, and if you've seen that video, you know that I absolutely 100% think that everybody should have ducks. They're such a benefit. If you missed that video, I'll leave a card up here somewhere for you to be able to watch it. But today I wanted to talk to you just a little bit more about once you've made the decision to get ducks, how you're going to take care of them. Now, the very first thing you need to decide is, are you going to get, like rescue ducks, somebody who got them, doesn't know what to do with them, and now they're juveniles or adults? Or are you going to get hatchlings that you get maybe from Tractor Supply or you get from a hatchery? Now, the best thing I think is to get them from a hatchery or from Tractor Supply. And the reason I say that is because then you know exactly what you're getting. When you have a juvenile or an adult, you don't really know exactly how old they are. And while ducks do live quite a long life, productive life, even with laying eggs, they lay eggs much longer than chickens do, you still don't know exactly what you're getting. So let's just say we're going to go ahead and get ducklings instead of juvenile or adult birds. The first thing you're going to want to know for sure is that when they hatch, and this also goes for if you have ducks on your property and they've had baby ducks and you've never had to take care of baby ducks, this is also going to pertain to that, because if you watched my last video, you know that I said that most ducks, at least in my experience, are not the greatest mothers. They will leave their babies to go get food and leave them completely unprotected. So in the past, we've had to take ducklings away from mama or put them behind some kind of secure area so that they can't wander around and lose their babies. If you have ducklings, the very first thing you want to know is you have to keep them warm and dry. Now, I know everybody has this idea of the dawn duckling that gets oil on them and they get them wet and they wash them and they're swimming around in the water. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but I will tell you that having had that idea in my head, I lost quite a few ducklings early on because I thought, they're ducklings. They're able to be out in the water. I mean, I've seen them on the Dawn commercial, but that's not really true. The first couple of weeks, they don't produce the feathers that will keep the water away from their body. So at least for the very first couple of weeks, you really got to make sure that they stay dry and they stay warm. Now, another thing that you need to keep up with and know is that ducks use their bills to get deep down in water to be able to digest their food. So I don't know if you've noticed at Tractor Supply lately, but they've come up with these new waterers that instead of just the round little, reservoir with the bell waterers, they now have them where they're like these squares that kind of raise up a little bit at an angle. And those are designed specifically for ducks so that they can get their bill all the way down in the water to be able to drink. So that's something that you'll need to keep in mind when you have ducklings. Now, another thing you're going to want to keep in mind is when you have a brooder set up for these ducklings, one, they're bigger than chicks right out, like when they hatch, they're bigger than chicks. So they're going to need a little bit more brooder space just at the very beginning, just because of their size. However, they also grow much faster than your standard chicks. They'll start out like this size and in a week they're here. I mean, they grow so fast. So make sure that your brooder has plenty of room to be able to give them enough space. Okay, so another thing that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're caring for your ducks, as soon as they are old enough to get outside, they are going to need another water source besides the one that they use to drink. And the reason for that is so that they can keep themselves clean. It also helps them to evade predators. They're able to swim out to where the foxes or dogs or whatever can't get to them. It also protects them from aerial predators so that if an aerial predator swoops down, they can dive down below the surface and the aerial predator can't get them. Okay, so with adult ducks, you most definitely want to make sure that you have a pond or something like that available for them, because not only is it all of the things that I just said, it's also going to be helpful for them if you're wanting to breed. If you have a male and females, it makes it a lot easier for them to breed if they're out in the water. I will tell you that the first couple of times that we saw that happen, we were terrified. We thought that the male was attacking the female and dunking her underwater, because that is pretty much what it looks like. But if you've ever seen ducks try to reproduce on land, their bodies are not shaped very well for them to have stability. So in the water, it makes them more buoyant so that they can do that without any big issues. The other thing is it also helps with the fertility of the eggs, obviously, because if he's able to be in the right position, then everything gets fertilized the proper way. So just another thing to think about when you're talking about ducks and having a pond. That's something to keep in mind as well. So while it's not necessary to have like a pond or something like that, it is most definitely helpful. And they're ducks, they like to swim, so you'll have happier ducks if you have a pond for them as well. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind when having ducks and taking care of them is they are not as susceptible to poultry diseases as chickens. All of their stuff, for the most part, is based off of environment. So if you do a good job of keeping their area clean, and like in this case, we have them where we're rotating them in different areas. If you don't keep them in one area for too long, where they get it all messy and there's feces everywhere, as long as you keep their area clean, they should stay pretty healthy. Now, another thing that makes them very similar to chickens is they molt just like chickens. Now, at the beginning, when they're young, they'll actually molt twice. And then after that, every year they will molt, usually around this time, the end of summer or the beginning of fall. And they'll get rid of all those feathers and get all new pretty feathers. And just like with chickens, they need a lot of extra protein during that time to be able to create those feathers. Now, another thing because of that to keep in mind is if you see them molt at a time that you wouldn't normally expect them to, that is a good indicator that they're not getting enough of the nutrients that they need in their feed. There's some kind of deficiency there, because what happens is the body's just not able to keep up with everything. So that's the first thing they do, is they just start to molt. So keep in mind that they do molt. Just like with chickens, they will not lay eggs, or they'll lay very few during that time. So if you want to try and up their protein, you can do some of the things that we showed in our chicken video, but you can also, one of the things that I found is that cat food is actually pretty high in protein. So if you have barn cats and you feed your barn cats, you could throw a little bit of that feed into your ducks during molting season to help them with a little bit more protein. But their molt takes anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks before they're fully back to laying eggs and everything being normal again. All right, so like I was talking about before with the brooder, you also need to keep in mind what their shelter is going to be. Now, ducks are obviously a lot bigger than chickens. The other thing is that chickens don't mind backing out of an area. Ducks don't particularly care to do that. So ducks like to just turn around. And so because of that, you need to have a lot more square footage per bird than you would a chicken. You're talking more like 4, 5, 6 square feet per bird, as opposed to the chicken, which is like 2 to 3. So keep that in mind when you're building the shelter. But the one cool thing is ducks don't roost like chickens do. So theirs doesn't need to be vertical. It just needs to be more wide so that you have more space for them to lay in. And I will tell you, you can build all the fancy plywood bottom, coops that you want for these guys. They prefer, and I've seen this with my own eyes, they prefer packed dirt. They'll have a nice area to go sit in, and they will go under our hay barn and sit on the packed dirt. They prefer that. So keep that in mind when you're building their shelter. Ducks don't like really being inside, being cooped up. They don't. They like walking around, running around outside, as opposed to being locked into a shelter. So if you're going to put them in a coop and lock them up at night, you're going to have to train them yourselves. They're not going to just go in on their own, at least not until you establish a routine where you put them up and then you let them out every day. That's the only way that that's going to happen. They won't just naturally do that. So keep that in mind as well, that you'll be chasing ducks around for a little while, putting them up at night, locking them up. You will have some that'll, you know, try to get away from you and hide somewhere so that they don't have to go inside, because they really don't like being indoors. All right, so this is something that I hear people go back and forth with all the time with ducks. When they're young, when you get them as ducklings, you absolutely want to give them something like a chick starter, like a 20%, so that they can have all that energy to do the feathers that they need to produce, that are going to keep, you know, the water away from their body, all that kind of stuff. You definitely, the first couple of weeks, you want to do that. Then after that, you can kind of step it down to about 18 to 16-ish%. And then at the 8-week mark, you can go down to like a 12 to 13 if you're just doing maintenance. Now, if you're growing them out, you most definitely want to still keep them on those 20% like grower starter rations. But one thing that I will tell you that I think is very interesting, and I covered this a little bit in my other video, ducks have a lower conversion rate. When they're doing feed to meat, the feed is about 2 pounds, 1 to 2 pounds per pound of meat, where a Cornish is like 2 to 3 pounds per pound of meat. So ducks are great at foraging, right? So that's why that feed conversion rate is so low compared to chickens. They naturally just walk around and find their own food. They will take, like if they're out here, 90% of their diet they fill with just vegetable matter, whether it's grass or leaves or actual vegetables or whatever they can find. 90% of their diet is fulfilled by that. And then the other 10 is like animals. So for them it would be more like mosquitoes, all kinds of different bugs, slugs, maybe even like small lizards and things like that. 10% of their diet they'll fulfill by doing that. They'll find, you know, bugs in the ground, they'll catch flies out of the air. So they don't need a whole lot of maintenance feed wise if you're just kind of letting them chill on your property. Now, if you're raising them 8 to 12 weeks, you want meat and that's what you want, by all means go for the 20% grower starter feed. But if you're just doing kind of like how we are, where we want them to be around, we want them to do the pest control on our property, they're fun to look at, they give us eggs, they give us more babies, that kind of thing. We have several ducks on our property and they may get a cup of feed a day around here between all of them. And they usually have to fight the chickens for it. And I don't have any sick ducks, I don't have any weak ducks. They're perfectly fine. So they will find their own food. You don't really need to worry about that. Just focus when they're ducklings, make sure that you set them up to succeed by giving them that grower starter, that high protein at first. All right, so the very last thing about taking care of ducks, it's kind of a euphemism at this point, but when it's time to butcher them, we haven't done this yet, but we've heard it over and over and over again. Wait until they're in full feather. When those feathers start to get as long as the tail feathers. At that point, you shouldn't have hardly any pin feathers to worry about, and there should be very little down feathers. So it'll make it much easier to pluck. Once you've dunked them and scalded them, you should be able to get those feathers out a whole lot easier. So that's why everybody says 8 to 10 to 12 weeks. That's after those 2 molts, when they go into full feather, that's the perfect time. If you're going to go ahead and butcher them, go ahead and do it then. Well, I hope this video was helpful for you. If you're still kind of on the fence about whether or not you should have ducks on your homestead and you haven't seen my previous video, go check it out. It's over here. And hopefully it'll help you make a well-informed decision. Thank you for stopping by the Big Bear Homestead. God bless and have a nice day.